Hello and welcome to an episode of Cabbie Conversations. I'm joined, as always, by my friend James.
Hello.
James, if you were finally caught for all of your illegal acts, of which there are many, and you were sentenced to the death penalty, what would you want your last meal to be? Assuming it could be pretty much anything.
Yeah. I think for me, if I was gonna die, I'd kind of want something quite comforting to eat.
Mm.
Um, I mean, you could apparently I think there was somewhere in America where a guy basically made such a decadent request, they then repealed the right to the last meal, which I think is quite sad. They
That's
could
a
have
bit
just said
stupid. I mean, come on.
they could have just said no, you can have something else. Don't ruin it for everyone else. But
Exactly.
there we go.
Could replace
But
it.
I think I would have to go for a roast lamb dinner personally. That's probably my favorite. I'd have like roast lamb, roast potatoes, leeks, peas, good gravy, red currant jelly. I'm not too keen on mint sauce, so you can scrap the mint sauce.
Whoa. Hang on, that's like the best part.
And then I'd probably go for like fruit. Like I'd probably have like strawberries, raspberries, and cream, like super traditional. But that is probably what I would go for.
You're true blue-blooded Brit. I appreciate
Yeah,
that. Is it when you say this, are you thinking of like the one your mum made? Like, would you get
yeah,
your mum to come in
absolutely.
and make it?
I'd get like my mum and my dad to come in because like my parents, like when I was growing up, would split the roast between them. So my
Yeah.
dad would do the meat and the gravy, and my mum
Mm,
would do the potatoes and vegetables,
mm.
and together it was just a winning combination. Um, and then if I was going to be picky about where my fruit came from, I would get it from Perthshire in Scotland because those are frankly the best. The best summer fruit I've ever had has come from there. So if I was going to be really like this is how I want it, that is what I would insist.
Nice. Well, I like
But
that. That's very wholesome. I was sort of a toss up between. I think you're right. I think you'd want something sort of comforting. For me, that would be like takeaway pizza. Or if I was feeling a bit fancy, I feel like that's a bit of a waste. So I feel like I would probably go for a really nice curry, um,
yeah,
Thai curry probably,
or a Thai
or
curry.
a steak maybe if I'm feeling extra fancy. I feel like a steak is too generic though. I feel like everybody has a steak.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, a roast dinner is pretty generic. If you're about to
Mm,
die, it's kind of like, what do you want? I think also for me, when if I was going to eat my last meal, I'd want to feel like satisfied after the last meal. Um, so I wouldn't want to eat fast food because then I feel
yeah,
like really, you know how when you leave, when you finish eating fast food, like it's really enjoyable, but then you finish and you feel absolutely terrible. If I'm about to die, I
absolutely.
want to minimize the terribleness.
As I get older, honestly, I don't get alcohol hangovers. I get food hangovers more so than anything. Like fucking junk food makes me feel awful the next day.
Yeah, junk food
It's
hangovers are really not nice.
um.
Um,
Well, speaking of gross food, what do you think is the worst food you've ever eaten?
uh, my school food was not nice. I cannot, I cannot. It was just so grim. Um, Fridays at my school was particularly bad. If I had to remember, if I'm remembering correctly, and it's a real toss up between two things they used to serve on Fridays. They used to make school spring rolls, and that sounds quite nice, okay, but it's not what you would think of as like an
Mm,
East Asian spring roll. It was about, let's say, as wide as long as a pen, like the school spring roll, and then about as fat as a Smarties tube. It's about a Smarties. It looks about like a Smarties, and it was thick pastry, right? And they deep fried it, and
ooh,
inside it, so it was like because it was in like quite a claggy pastry. It wasn't phyllo pastry, or if it was not good phyllo pastry. It then like all soaked with fat, And then inside was not like bean sprouts and like cabbage and things that you would normally find. It was frozen mixed veg, deep fried
Oh my
inside.
god.
And it's honestly, you would like stab it, and like this green sort of snotty fluid would come out with
Oh
like
no.
with like bits of carrot and sweet corn. It was honestly just horrendous. And
That is
um and
foul.
it would be set with like that long grain, like really thick fluffy rice. It was just, and it was all dry. It was just horrendous. That was no.
Oh god. That is fucking foul.
Yeah.
You know what? I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I'm probably like in the same way as school food. It doesn't even matter what school you go to, I feel like I went to like a not that bad school, but for some reason they always just cheap out with the kitchen. Like,
Oh, they do. I supposedly went to a great school. The school food
mm.
was appalling, however. So I don't think
Boarding
it matters.
school is like, I feel like you're just trapped. It's basically prison food at that point.
It's a tier above prison food, but it's prison food 3 times a day, 7 days a week. I don't know, like for 8 weeks at a stretch.
Well, I think, to be honest, um, I've actually eaten insects before.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Deep
Which
fat
one did you eat?
fried. I can't even remember, it was my granddad gave it to me. It was deep fat fried with lots of salt on. So to be fair, it didn't really taste much like insects. So it wasn't even that
Yeah.
bad once you got over the sort of mental hurdle of it. I will say there was also some like grubs on offer, like not maggots, but like I guess caterpillars or something. I don't know, but I didn't go for them. But
No.
that stuff doesn't really bother me as much. I would much rather have that than sprouts. I know it's
So
like
you're
such a
really not a
generic
fan of
thing.
Brussels sprouts?
No, I'm really not. I know that's such a generic, like horrid Henry type shit, but it's like I fucking hate him so much. And my brother's girlfriend, when she came over for Christmas, insisted that we have sprouts.
Oh God.
Fucking revolting.
I mean, we have sprouts at Christmas, and like I don't really mind them, but I always pretend I don't like them. So my mum then has to like give me one, because she insists that I have one. She insists my brother has one, and so she kind of gives you like the Christmas sprout. I mean, I don't think they're that bad, but I find it quite funny. For me, though, vegetable wise, courgettes is an absolute no go.
Oh,
Absolute no
really?
go. Yeah, no courgettes. Absolutely not. Those
No,
are
they're a bit gross.
they're the worst vegetables in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
What do you feel about aubergine? Because they're kind of similar in my eye.
No, I love aubergine. Aubergine's
Yeah.
delicious.
Aubergine is just like courgette but better.
No, aubergine aubergine I don't has less flavor, but you can add lots of flavors to it really well. I think it makes quite a good meat substitute.
Mm.
Um, so I'm a big fan of aubergine. I think aubergine's great. You have to cook it right, otherwise it goes slimy. But courgette is slimy no matter what you do to it. So the
That's
courgette is
true.
always a no.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
And it has a
And
taste.
yeah, I think almost like with vegetables, you almost don't want much taste because whenever they do taste of anything, they taste gross.
Uh, I I do like the taste of a lot of vegetables, but I don't really like a bitter taste.
Yeah.
Um, so I tend not to like more bitter tasting vegetables, but
Mm.
or really watery ones. So I don't like cucumber either. Anything that looks like a courgette or a cucumber is a no from me. So the marrow family is pretty much off the table as far as I'm
It's just
concerned.
pointless cucumber. It's just like eating water.
But it
Like,
tastes of cucumber. It doesn't
yeah.
it tastes of cucumber. Like watermelon
Gross.
does not taste of water, it tastes of watermelon.
Mm.
So I'm very fussy about this.
No, it's true.
But should we move on to our main topic of
Yes,
today?
to the main course, if you will. We're speaking of food. Let's talk about some weird and strange and generally bad food production. habits that people have.
Yeah,
Um,
because
it's all very strange, and there's a lot of stuff that people don't know about. Um, I feel like in the modern world where you can buy almost anything in the supermarket, it's very easy to not be aware of where stuff comes from, how it ends up on your plate.
yeah,
Particularly,
and
yeah, go on.
oh, sorry. I think yeah, the globalization of food. So as before,
Mm,
if when our grandparents went to the supermarket, or we didn't have a supermarket, when your grandparents walked down the high street to go buy their food, they go to the butcher, the fishmonger, the greengrocer, and the greengrocer general food store, and those were like the options they had. But everything had to come from relatively locally, is because shipping and stuff was expensive. We didn't have the technology to preserve foods, so everything was generally fresher and more local because it would go off and we wouldn't know how to look after it. These days, especially with like plants and stuff, we've got very, very smart about how to, you can basically use plant hormones and cold fridges to send plants to stop fruit going off. Um, so it's very easy so it's much easier to transport things globally, and we've just got smarter. But that also means we can go to countries where the production is cheaper, but the food standards are not necessarily as high. Um, and that can lead to, or the governing regulatory regulation of the food is not as good. And that can
mm,
lead to, yeah, a lot of corruption and
mm.
badness.
As with almost all modern business, it's all been moved offshore. A lot of stuff that you never used to be able to buy, like you say, you can now buy, and even stuff that you can grow in this country is being grown offshore, either just because it's cheaper or because it's out of season or something. That's the other thing too. I think what this really comes down to is ultimately people, myself included, are a bit entitled in terms of what food they want. I feel like back in the
Mm,
day, it was like if strawberries weren't in season, well, that's it, you can't have them. But now it's like,
yeah,
what? You're not selling strawberries? Like, I want them. It's like, it's not an option anymore for shops not to sell supermarkets all year round. But obviously, you can't grow them in the winter. You just have to ship them off, like
yeah,
from elsewhere. And like you say, they often come from countries that uh, the food practices, the way the workers work, is not as high as ours. They get paid a lot less, the minimum wage and stuff. Um, so it's and on top of also the environmental issues that arise from sending everything on boats and planes and whatever to get to this country. It's all a bit of a mess.
it really is. Like researching this topic has really kind of like, I guess, really shocks me about the food industry. Um,
Mm,
and how sort of like I didn't I think we kind of grow up with quite a romanticized view of farmers, um,
yeah.
that they work off the land and then they sell off their produce to a farmer's market, or maybe to their local supermarket, or a local store rate. But that is really not the case anymore these days. The concept of it's high output, it's high use of pesticides and fertilizers to keep production high. It's very intensive, and it's and farmers are often not give often basically treated really poorly, because the demand in wealthy countries is basically to have food as cheap as much different kinds of food as cheap as possible. um, so so farmers are put under immense pressure for high production, low cost. And so
Mm,
when you do that, that means that that like they're undercut, and that can lead to all sorts of like that making sure they try and make a profit and stuff can lead to base some pretty bad malpractice.
yeah, it's led to some very shady, well, not even shady practices, but just I guess you'd call it like cutting corners. like
Yeah.
meat. I mean, there's a lot to say about meat, but like I think one of the biggest problems with it is how they grow the meat. They're often
Mm.
pumped full of hormones, um, growth supplements, all this stuff, and obviously that doesn't go away when you like kill them and put it in, chop it up into steak or whatever. Um,
No, they're
no,
given a
this is
lot.
a yeah. Go on.
They're given a lot of antibiotics in particular, which is
Mm.
an issue because that causes antibiotic resistance. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's yes, that was the other thing too. Is I didn't even know that. I mean, I felt stupid when I realized it, but yeah, it's like we have to. It's such an inefficient system. We have to raise these animals, protect them from disease, feed them. Like, there's so much effort that goes into making and producing meat. Like, it's absurd. Uh, and yeah, it's like, well, obviously because they've been pumped full of so many antibiotics, and you're then eating it, it can potentially cause you to become resistant and stuff like that. Obviously, with time, these sort of practices have been uh, uh, clamped down on by legislation, at least in this country, somewhat in America, not really elsewhere. um, it almost is getting into like conspiracy theories territory, like, oh, what are they putting in? But it's true, like they don't. It's not like the old days anymore, where these animals grow up freely. I mean, some of them do, but like they don't just let. They're not just left to go out in the field, and then a farmer comes along and takes off one a day, and then it's like these things are basically factory produced at this point.
Um, Talking about animals too, it's not also just what like the medicines that we give them and to make them grow as big as possible. It's also the actual feed we give them and the
Mm,
sources we give them. So, for example, a lot of Tesco farmers feed their cows soy, and where is the soy grown? The soy is grown in the Amazon rainforest. So even because it's well known that cattle ranchers are deforesting the Amazon rainforest to plant cattle there, but they're also we're also growing crops there to basically to then feed our own country. So although all our beef might be say British beef or whatever, we are still contributing to the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest um, um, in a roundabout way by by making sure by the feed that we are providing to our livestock coming from a a endangered area.
mm. No, absolutely. It's yes, it's funny that, isn't it? It's like so many British in particular, I think, have this obsession with meat where they always say like, oh, it's British grown, obviously, and like it's they were treated well or whatever, they weren't kept in cages. But yeah, you have to think like one step further, like, well, they're not just living on nothing, they're not just eating the grass, like they're given lots and lots of extra food. And where does that come from? And it's like, it's all well and good to say that we are not, because obviously we're not cutting down the local woods in Britain anymore. We're doing that over in South America and stuff with the rainforest. Um, it's a real shame, and it's if you really think about it, it's so inefficient. Because, and I'm not like against eating meat, I should clarify this, but if you think about it, like if we were the ones eating the soy that was produced to feed the cattle, it would just skip that step, and we would need so much less of it. Because
Mm.
as I'm sure you know, as a scientist, James, it's like when you have a food, what they call food pyramid, like
Yeah,
a bit of energy gets
trophic
lost.
levels.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah. I
food
mean,
web,
very
trophic
few, very small amount of energy gets passed on to the next layer.
yeah,
Like, so
10%. 10% of
yeah.
energy is passed on from the primary trophic level, which is the sun. So 10% of the sun's energy goes to plants.
Mm,
10% of those plants then go to the primary what's it called, consumer, which is a
mm,
herbivore, in this case cattle. and then 10% of that energy goes towards us, be it in the form of milk or milk solids or beef.
Yeah. So if you think about it that way, we're getting 10% of the energy that we could be getting. You know what I mean? It's
Yes.
like, it's just
So
for
we're
the sake
getting
of
a 100th of the energy that we
yes.
would get.
Yeah, 100th even, not even 10th. It's ridiculous. And obviously this isn't even mentioning, like, again, the environmental impact of having this much cattle and cows and stuff, like the methane they produce. It's not obviously as much as like fossil fuels, but it's still a decent amount. And if it weren't for our need for agriculture, they would definitely produce a lot less methane.
Something that has really interested me is how luxury foods, almost superfoods, you could dub them, have actually caused some of the biggest controversy in the global market. So things such as avocados and almonds, honey and chocolate. Hot chocolate being less of a superfood, but it's still sort of viewed as a luxury food item. Chocolate is not an essential thing to eat, as much as many people like it. But these luxury foods have caused lots of extortion, and or like have also major climate effects too.
Yeah, avocados in particular is like, it's insane.
Exactly, yeah.
It's almost like a drug cartel.
It is a drug cartel. So in Michoacan, which is the world's biggest producer and exporter of avocados globally, Michoacan being a region of Mexico, the avocado industry in Mexico in 2019 was worth $2.4 billion. It's staggering for avocados. They're hugely popular because they're viewed as a health food, a healthy source of monounsaturated
it's
fatty
fat,
acids.
but it's like the good fat.
It's the good cholesterol. It's your HDL cholesterol. It's not going to clog the stuff that's not going to clog your arteries. It's good for your membranes, things like that. It's really rich in that. And like you said, cartels have moved off maybe more traditional forms of as we think of as Mexico, of drug cartels trying to sell like cocaine and weed. They're instead actually moving on to avocados as, firstly, they're a more legitimate crop. But the issue is that, so people are being killed or basically coerced and forced by these cartels to give them a slice of their work, of their production. And this is throughout. This is not just at the farming level. This goes at like the factory imports, and then at the export and at the exporting area too. They're trying to constantly take a cut. And the police are corrupted with different gangs. So it's very hard for the locals to do anything about it. And also, it's not just one gang, which is kind of easier to focus on and be aware of. It's fragmented into tens of gangs. So it's really hard to stay on top of who's doing what, how do they manage it, because it's when your forces basically infiltrated with these cartels, and then you've also got tens of different people to keep, it's almost impossible.
No, exactly. It's the same, almost the same exact tactics that were used in drug production is being used in avocado. Of course, you could argue the main difference, of course, being that it's a legit business, but even still, it's like you say, that they're extorting bit workers. They're corrupt. They're in with the government and stuff like that. It's insane. But all of this is to say that it's not necessarily the fault of the consumer. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not the fact that we're buying avocados. I mean, it's the fact that they're being sort of pushed onto us. A a lot of these products, like you say, their main sort of advertising draw, aside from the fact that it's just a bit of variation, I suppose, and that it's a luxury item, is all these, like, you know, it's got health benefits, all this stuff. Companies are very good at advertising food and stuff to you, and where that happens, there's always a lot of money to be involved. A good example of that is bottled water. A resource. It's you know, when you really think about it, bottled water, it shouldn't really exist as a product.
No.
You know, you could argue that a lot of capitalists' products are just convenience. You know, there's nothing stopping you, if your washing machine breaks or something, from buying the parts and fixing it yourself, but obviously you're paying for the convenience of it if you just hire a mechanic. And you could say the same is true for bottled water, where the main thing is, like, well, you're paying for the convenience of having it, like, on the go, say. But the whole business is so booming. I mean, it's worth more than, like, beer and wine or something. I heard, like, people drink so much bottled water, and it's had such a negative impact in lots of cases, because obviously, where the fuck do they get the water from? They dry up springs, you know. They can't just create it from nothing, and they take it from oftentimes, especially in America, they take it from towns and cities that you know, they take it from their water supply, which is often met with a lot of opposition, protests and stuff like that. This isn't even to mention the fact that sometimes, you know, there's accidents, and they spill chemicals and cause huge health and environmental problems, and it's just all a mess. I mean, it's a huge multi-billion-dollar business that shouldn't exist, at least in my opinion.
It's really but the water situation is really upsetting, and it's a human right. Water, frankly, it should not be. Your access to clean fresh water should never be questioned, but it is in so many places a luxury. And like in the US, for example, in Flint, Michigan, they don't have tap water that they can access. But what is staggering, a town about I'm going to say about 15 miles away, I can't remember, 15, 20 miles, I can't remember the name of the town. There's a Nestle plant, a Nestle water plant, which basically, so instead of that water being redirected back to Flint, where they could then have drinkable water, Nestle is there hugely profiting from a water source, and then selling the bottled water around the world. And I think a lot of this marketing of bottled water then creates distrust with people with tap water. And so therefore they buy more bottled water. And the problem also with bottled water is the fact that, well, it's in a bottle. So it's so where do you put all these plastic bottles? And they just end up in countries such as, like, was it Ghana, where they don't have it's Nigeria, where they don't have good water system, they don't have good irrigation, they don't have good waste removal. These plastic bottles then get thrown into the street, end up in the gutter, and then these plastics leach into the water supply and contaminate the water supply, and then make whatever water access there is drinkable, and people do drink from, contaminated. So what do people do? Buy more bottled water. So Nestle is sitting there making a nice big pretty penny. Meanwhile, other people, people are people who are very poor are struggling to find enough to drink, to cook with, to wash. There is nothing more essential than water. And another place where this is a problem is in Chile, but for different reasons. In Chile is the only nation in the world where water is privatized. So in the US, with the bottled water, the water company buys the site, and then basically takes the free commodity of water. But in Chile, it's kind of simple, but it's all privatized. So while Nestle might just have one plant in Michigan, in Chile, all the water is owned by farmers, mostly, in particular, the most wealthy people in Chile. and they basically take this water and use it to direct their crops. So all of the most wealthy farmers in Chile can benefit from their crops, but poor people in Chile don't have access to water.
That's insane.
Because it's too expensive, and they don't have the power to move the irrigation so they have what they need. It's actually staggering. I couldn't believe it when I heard that. And to me, that's just abysmal.
I was just thinking, how long do you think it's like we have a total recall situation where we have to pay for the air? It's like it's not really far
coming.
off. It's like the reason, like you said, a lot of the reasons why people buy bottled water, particularly in America and like places like LA, for example. Yeah, people just, like you say, don't trust the tap water, or they think it tastes gross. Because bottled water is often like more filtered or whatever. So there are plenty of people who, even if they do live in a place that has good access to clean water, will choose to drink bottled water anyway, which just it just creates this vicious cycle. And when will it get to the point where the sort of the free supply has gotten so polluted that the only option is bottled water? And then it's like, well, you literally have to pay to not die.
Very much so.
Yeah, it's good. But what I was going to say, yeah, you mentioned like water should be a human right. I think I agree. There's definitely been a push for that. There's also been a push to say that food should be a human right. Do you think you agree with that?
Agreed. I think food, water, shelter are the most fundamental human needs that we have. If you do not have food, water, shelter, you're not going to live very long. Just watch these people go on the Bear Grylls, the island. They all look like complete muppets, and they almost kill themselves after 2 weeks.
No, it's true. I agree. It's and when we say like it's a human right, we don't necessarily mean that it should be like free. That's not really the same thing. It's as long as it's like accessible to all. In this country, for example, there's no chance, unless you choose to, that you would starve or die of thirst, because there are food banks, or I mean, maybe in some very, very niche situations it could happen, but there's access to clean water somehow. Basically, there's no chance really that you're going to starve. So that's the kind of thing I think that we should be aiming for in every country. I mean, at the very least, like access to clean water. It's a very controversial opinion, I know.
Sure. I mean, yeah, it really is in some places.
So where do you think the burden lies in terms of, like we talked obviously about access to food and stuff, but in terms of, so say in America and the UK and a lot of Europe and stuff, we really have more food than we ever need. Whose responsibility do you think it is to make sure that we are eating healthy and that we're not eating too much?
It's a difficult one, because at the end of the day, choosing what you eat and how you eat is like one of the greatest aspects of freedom. As we were discussing the horrors of school food earlier, we don't really have a freedom of choice. We have this disgusting meat option or this disgusting vegetarian option. Yes, you can choose between eating meat or eating vegetarian, but at the end of the day, they're both still disgusting, and you still have to eat it. One of the great things of living in a free country is the choice of do I want to say tonight, do I want to eat Thai, or do I want to eat soup and bread, or do I want to eat that is a wonderful thing. But at the same time, even if we don't regulate if the government doesn't regulate what we eat, we could be eating foods potentially with high toxins. That's where the idea of a brand came in the Victorian era. Brands came in the Victorian era because basically people would go to the shops and shopkeepers would try and raise their profits. So they'd stick cheaper but poisonous ingredients in foods. And that's where the brands came about, because brands base, and why people like brands, because they provide a promise of quality.
Yeah.
And that is why I'd say Britain has relatively good food standards. But it's definitely not a perfect science. Every day, one week we're told don't eat eggs, next week we're told eat eggs.
Yeah, it's I think the accountability thing is important. Like, yeah, because when it makes such a big difference. Like, well, a good example is the horse meat scandal. We all knew who to blame straight away. It was, Tesco. We knew, like, it was, very easy to point the finger. Which obviously then encourages other big brands not to do that, which is always nice. I think I agree with you. I think we should never be in a situation where we're told exactly how much to eat, and then you couldn't enforce that anyway, really. No. And as much as it really makes me upset to see so many larger people in this country and in America, I would say that they are not blameless themselves, because yes, I think that there is definitely an immoral practice going on with like fast food companies. I mean, I really don't think you should be able to advertise fast food on like children's networks, for example.
It's banned in the UK for a start.
It is banned in the UK. It's not banned in America.
It's not.
It's really that's really disgusting to me. And obviously there's parts that slip through the cracks, like YouTube. You can re-advertise McDonald's on YouTube and kids watch that all day. So there is definitely like more responsibility for the companies. Of course, they won't do that themselves. You have to introduce regulations to stop them from doing that. It's a strange world where some people are super fat and some people are super skinny.
I do think it's up to the government to regulate food standards. And countries that we trade with food. Some countries have different records. So, for example, we don't buy our avocados as a nation generally from Mexico. Most of them come from Spain, Israel, Africa, and Peru, and they do also come from Chile. So should we, knowing what's going on in Chile, continue to get our avocados from Chile? Maybe not. Like the government or supermarkets in the UK can take moral stances on how is the most ethical way for us to get our food, because people generally, I think, do care. They are naive to where their food comes from, but if they knew what was going on, they would care, I believe. For example, we don't import our honey from China, and China is known for basically putting a lot of toxins and metal toxins, like heavy metals, and then also antibiotics to bees, which then actually aren't very good for the bees, and then also end up in the honey, and then also adding in cheapest alternative syrups, so it's not completely what we would view as honey. The UK doesn't trade with China for honey, so that the UK or countries do, and sovereignties do have choices and where they choose to buy their globalized food from, and they should make choices, and they should not encourage unethical food practices, because at the end of the day, it will undermine our natural resources, and it will encourage the underminement of our natural resources. It will compromise the health of the nation, and it will basically allow corruption to grow and permeate, which will only make systems worse. So I think it's important to have good regulation and to manage that, but I don't think you can really tell people how much to eat. But if we want to talk about the sugar tax, I think that's a slightly different subject, but I'm quite happy to talk about that.
Yeah, well, that's a less direct way of going about it, which I think is a decent idea. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, unfortunately, the reality is, well, we saw this happen a little while ago when there was the proposition that we might start trading America with America like their chlorinated chickens. People kicked up a very big fuss about that, and I think it might still happen, but I think for that reason, the government is very hesitant to go ahead with that deal. I think if people are aware enough, like you say, and they kick up enough of a fuss, that's what makes the big difference in the long run, is in who the government chooses to trade with. That's why every piece of food you buy nowadays will have like country of origin on it. I think that's a requirement to have. That's because people want to know that stuff. And it's not like we need it. Ultimately, again, like I said, we're never going to starve. We have enough food, at least in this country, that we don't need to be trading with shady countries. We don't need to be supporting drug cartels and all this stuff. Like, I don't know. It's what was I going to say? Yeah, what do you think about the whole people? Do you think people should eat less meat? Do you think that would make a big difference in terms of environmental and health and all that stuff?
I do. I also think that people aren't aware of the issue of fishing.
Yeah.
And overfishing. Fish, like, biggest carbon source in the world is not the Amazon rainforest, it's the sea.
It's the seaweed, kelp.
It's the algae, it's the
Yeah.
seaweed, it's the krill. It's all of those are huge natural carbon sinks. And but if we disrupt the ecosystem within the seas too much, we'll create an even bigger problem than the one we have with the. So I do think we need to cut our risk of animal farming, but I don't think you need to necessarily give up eating meat. I think you need to be aware of where your meat comes from and the sort of meat you choose to eat. I think there are health consequences of not eating meat or not eating animal protein for many people, but I do think we should eat less.
I think it ultimately, I think what it comes down to is that you should see it more as like a luxury thing, which is what it was originally. Because I would never say that we should stop eating meat altogether. There are certainly a lot of communities that their whole income revolves around meat and fish in particular. So I think that's a bit silly, but definitely we eat way too much. I think I'm guilty of this too. I think I eat probably at least one piece of meat a day, which was just unheard of like a few decades ago, I should say. Like, if we just cut that down a bit, it would make such a huge difference. Fish in particular, because there's no real way to like farm fish. We have to just catch it out in the sea. So there's a very, very, very good chance that we can overfish and there just won't be any more. It's a very scary prospect.
Of there being no fish in the sea. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very frightening. But I would also say don't necessarily stop eating fish. Maybe don't eat certain fishes like tuna in particular, or maybe prawns, or in more endangered species of fish. But if you stop eating fish, if Westerners stop eating fish, Westerners are the great enforcers of regulation. And so if Westerners basically lose their appetite for fish or even maybe meat, less regulated countries will overtake the system, and they don't have such strong, they don't really care, so they will
Yeah.
overfish the sea, and they will go into, there is hardly any of the sea, but they will go after species that are extremely endangered, and they will wipe out the species and distort the food web. So I
Absolutely.
think that's important. But I also think that certain foods, are not environmentally, beneficial for us. Like, as someone who lives in Britain, but like, say things like, so just out of almonds and avocados, they're not indigenous to the UK. So they've got to be shipped. They're also very water intensive. So a little fact about almonds: it takes 5 liters of water to grow one almond.
That's ridiculous.
And as a comparison, it takes 100 liters of water to make 100 milliliters of milk. So it's 5,000 times what, like, to make one almond, but it's only 1,000 times one to make 100 milliliters of milk. So there's a 5 times factor on almonds to cow's milk, which is just something to be aware of. Like, just because something is plant-based, or it doesn't mean it's not necessarily always a greener option. So it could be, it's the same thing with like tofu, whereas tofu grown in East Asia, yes, it has a lower, but it still has to be shipped from the other side of the world. I know the transport is often a small factor in these things, but I think that it's still not a factor to completely remove. I do think we are getting better in the UK at growing our own plant alternative proteins, but I would say it's not necessarily a bad thing to engage in a traditional diet, and because it's local to you, and it's not necessarily there's less transport involved. If you don't necessarily want to give up meat, I think it's another way of looking at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's you don't have to stay up all night worrying about this stuff. But it's like I think if you eat locally, that's like the biggest thing you can do. Because again, it's like one of the biggest problems is how much of a carbon footprint all this stuff has.
Locally,
and just
exclusively.
Yeah, and just be conscious of where your food comes from. Did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I just say just don't be naive to don't always believe everything the supermarket says, or what they're probably they're not, because it's a good marketing ploy to look it's good marketing to look ethical, but if you kind of look underneath it, you'll often find that it's not necessarily the case. So kind of always just be aware. And also, if you're conscious of eating meat, conscious of eating fish, I would say, but you still want to continue to eat those sort of forms of protein, research what species or where or what kind of farms and stuff you are interested in eating, and like look at impartial advice. Don't necessarily look at say like a fish, like I don't know, the Tesco website or something. Maybe look at an activist posts, take them with a pinch of salt, follow something like Greenpeace, but also look at the fishing trade markets and the fishing levels of each different kinds of fish. So then when you go to the supermarket, you can be, or if you go to the fishmongers or whatever, butchers, you can be aware of what is going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Yes. Supermarkets are always trying to sell you stuff. And try and look past that rosy charade of, oh, this is all fresh and ethically produced, and these chickens got to run around in a field. Isn't that nice? It's it's all a ploy, like everything in life. So I'm going to put my anarchy symbol away and say thank you for listening and goodbye.
So this is what my mum made for dinner. It's rotten. She's fucked it up.
Oscar!
What?
If you don't bloody like it, you can make your own fucking dinner.
Leave down in the comments if my mum's to get a better
There you
cook.
go.
Or she to make my dinner or Ratu.